I don't get a ton of pushback from parents most of the time. And I give talks at, for parent groups in schools, quite frequently. What I hear the most is, oh, but that ship has sailed. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. And I address that in the book because I think that's important to address of, hey, what if you did give your 11-year-old a smartphone? Well, take it back.
Yeah,
Take it
right.
back and give him a flip phone or give him a phone designed for kids or give him no phone at all. That's too
Yeah,
young. So I don't agree with that argument of like, oh, once you've given it to them, it's all over. You let them on social media, well, it's all over. No, there are
yeah,
still things that you can do.
yeah.
And, yes, it's easier if you do it, a certain way from the beginning, but you can go back. I had to do that with my kids and their laptops. We did really well with phones, but then with laptops, we had to backtrack. And I'm really, really glad that we did.
My name is Frank Schaefer, and this is In Conversation with Frank Schaefer. And my guest today is Dr. Jean Twenge, and she is someone who, this is not part of the official introduction, but there are some public intellectuals in the States that I read everything they write. You're one of them, Jean, and I have followed you for a long time, and friends of yours like Jonathan Haidt, and I had Brad Wilcox on a couple of times, and you cite him in a
Mhm.
study that you've published
Yes.
about married life. So, we there's a lot of points where our lives touch, and one of them is just, the hours I've spent reading your material. And I'm going to introduce you properly, but before I do, this is your new book. Um,
Yes.
and it's 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World. And I just want to show you how dog-eared it is. That's my
Nice.
reading and notes, and those are for real. So let me finish the introduction the way I'm supposed to do it. You teach psychology at San Diego State University, and you're the author of more than 190 scientific publications and books. And your new book is 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World, How Parents Can Stop Smartphones, Social Media, and Gaming from Taking Over Their Children's Life. And then I'm going to ask my viewers to please subscribe right now on YouTube to the live stream and also when this replays to In Conversation with Frank Schaefer and to the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And to my Substack, it has to be said, commentary at frankschaefer.substack.com. And the other thing I want to say is that we're making your book our book club offering for October. And that would be 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World as part of our It Has to Be Read book club. So before we get into the book, I want to go to something else, and that is read a paragraph from an article that you wrote a little while ago that I loved, called The Marriage Effect. And it was interesting because it ties in very closely to this book in the sense that it sort of describes your own commitment to being a mother and someone in a relationship. And by the way, I've been doing the child care for three of my five grandchildren who live across the street, ages 17, 15, and 11 as we speak, for the last 17 years since my that granddaughter was born. So I have been in the daily child care loop, and I am working with kids exactly the age of the kids you reference in your new book, 10 Rules. So we're very much at the same period of life, even though I'm 73 years old, but I'm in the grandparent caregiver stage. Okay, you write about a study that you did with Janet Erickson, Wendy Wang, and yourself and Brad Wilcox set out to answer a question about marriage. And here's quoting you: what we found contradicts the negative messages that I had come across. Married mothers are actually happier than unmarried women, and married women without children. In the survey, 19% of married mothers described themselves as, quote, very happy, compared with 11% of married women without children. And you start that article by talking about the fact that you had received sort of negative messages at certain points of your life about marriage. My daughter, since I got Jeannie pregnant when we were 17 and 18, and we've been together 57 years now, is 57 years old. She was born the year we got married as teenagers. And she became a CEO of a company in New York City, and as a consultant to the European Union on energy policy. And I asked her for a book I'm writing about relationships and dogs and why we should learn from the way dogs behave, because that's how people should behave when treating each other. I said, will you write me an email about your experience of parenthood? And it was like it was taken from your article, because she said, when people ask me how I became a CEO, the kind of job that women are all supposed to want. I tell them, well, luckily, I had my children young enough so that the first big experience of life I had was mothering and parenting. And I learned more from parenting than I did from any of the stuff I was supposed to learn from at NYU or places she studied.
Mhm.
So that's a weird introduction to your work. But the thing is, I think the credibility of your book, 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High Tech World, is that you are part of the world of parenting first and a
Mhm.
social scientist second. And I hope I haven't mischaracterized you, but that's the way I read your material.
Yeah, and that's what this book came out of. That, I've researched teens and kids and tech for a long time, but the impetus of this book was also being the mother of three teenagers.
Yeah. And you refer to that. And just to sort of cut to the chase here, I'm going to read your rules at the beginning and then we can start talking about them. And I have a lot of places in the book that I sort of want to quote you to you. Rule one, you're in charge. Rule two, no electronic devices in the bedroom overnight. I think that's a really important one. No social media until age 16 or later. Rule four, first phones should be basic phones. Rule five, give the first smartphone with the driver's license. So I'm guessing around 16. Rule six, use parental controls. Rule seven, create no phone zones. Rule eight, give your kids real world freedom. Rule nine, beware of the laptop and the gaming console and the tablet. And rule 10, advocate for no phones during the school day. So the first question I have is not how did you come up with the rules, but talk about Jonathan Haidt and some of the other people who have done some of this work. You're part of a movement that is really questioning the tech bros' wisdom, if we want to call it that,
Mhm.
that has engulfed all of us in their profitable enterprise of online everything and taken most parents, including most grandparents, speaking for myself, totally unaware and by surprise.
Mhm.
I mean, we've all been sandbagged. Nobody saw this coming. So the first thing I want to ask you about is how you've seen the basic change that you talk about with the iGeners and all these other people of your material I've read. Just give us a brief history of going from the world I grew up in the 1950s, 60s, and
Mhm.
70s to the world we're in now and why we need your book.
Yeah, so I get this question a lot as a Gen Xer. So people will say, "Hey, but I'm Gen X and I watched a ton of TV and we turned out okay."
Hmm.
So there's that's kind of how it started. TV had big effects too. So in my previous book, Generations, I actually dug into technology as a whole and the impacts that it's had.
Yeah.
And there's always trade-offs. TV is a great example that, yeah, sure, it's fun, but Robert Putnam in Bowling Alone,
Yeah.
the conclusion that he comes to at the end of that 800 pages is of why community fell apart in the US is TV.
Yeah.
So it's not all good. It's not that, we got away without any scrapes and bruises from that.
Yeah.
So TV is also interesting because we didn't take it with us everywhere we went.
Hmm.
It didn't interfere with people having dinner at a restaurant uh, or with the school day. Sometimes I joke about that, and I'm not even really joking. Like,
Mm.
we let kids bring phones to school and have them out in the classroom. Well, we have let kids, like walk in with a television. And back
Yeah.
in the day, of course, we wouldn't have done that. So, yeah, we have mass media, we have technology, but it didn't take over childhood and adolescence
Yeah.
the way that smartphones and social media have.
Yeah.
That, I mean, and my big thing is analyzing data from these huge data sets of teens that go back to the 70s. Average TV use among teens never moved beyond about 2 hours a
Yeah.
day. And
Yeah.
now screen time, according to Common Sense Media, is 9 or 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
And Gallup found social media time 5 hours a day.
Yeah.
That's an enormous, enormous amount of time that
Mm.
crowds out time for things like seeing friends in person, getting enough sleep, exercising, going outside, spending time with your family without that phone interfering with it.
Yeah.
It's a completely different childhood. So I'll mention, one big change. So it used to be very common for teens to go out with their friends multiple
Mm.
evenings a week. They would drive around in cars to go to the mall or just hang out. And that's been cut in half.
Yeah.
And that was one of the first things I started to document that made me wonder what was going on, that there were
Yeah.
these huge generational shifts, particularly in teens spending time with each other in person.
Yeah, one thing that I wonder if it contributed, and I'm going to be going into the book itself for some of the quotes from you, but just talking to you person to person here in a conversational kind of way before we get into the book. It seems to me, having been a parent myself, a young parent in both Europe and then in the States, and one child, John, my son, who was our youngest child, who's now 45, um, got into the very beginning of computery stuff with video games. And then he joined the Marine Corps and he came out having been in combat in Afghanistan. He got very serious in that part of his life, went off to the University of Chicago and did very well there.
My alma mater.
Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
he loved the University of Chicago. It was great. So he came out of there um, with the kind of education that you get when you haven't been a phone kid, even though he was sort of into the video game thing. And then watching with his three kids, some of whom were more readers than others, others into the phone more. It's almost, they're doing well, thank God, and we're very involved with their lives. But the battles we had as parents have nothing to do with the world they now live in. There's a sort of a generational divide that's total. It's
Yeah.
not like all the wisdom I gained in being a father of three kids who are now grown and done well. Um, it applies in some ways. Be polite, say please and thank you, be respectful. But this phone thing has changed the dynamic to the point where my relationship with those grandchildren and also watching them, how they interact with their friends, it's almost as if you've gone to a foreign culture.
Yeah.
Everything I learned is still sort of useful, but it's not the big theme anymore. The big theme is interacting with this stuff. So in your book, of course, you talk about the extremes, the eating disorders, the self-harm, the depression. And this has not affected our family directly yet, but half the friends that they tell me about who have various difficulties are all related to what you're talking about.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So I go over in the book, some of the extreme outcomes, but there's just the everyday. There's the everyday unhappiness and dissatisfaction and sadness that comes from things like I posted this and I didn't get any likes, or I'm never going to be able to have that perfect body that those influencers on Instagram have, or I saw all these pictures of the party that I didn't get invited to,
Yeah.
or the outing that my friends went on without telling me. It wasn't just something I heard about. I can actually see the pictures in real time when I'm alone in my
Yeah.
room at home.
Yeah, one thing you write that's struck me as a parent and grandparent that's very helpful is that you're saying it doesn't mean we should give up. It is possible to protect kids from the worst aspect of today's intrusive, immersive technology. You just need a few rules, not halfway squishy rules, not, quote, let's talk to the kids about good
Yeah.
digital citizenship rules, not it depends rules, but concrete rules for how to stem the digital tide. All right, so the book's just come out, but you've been writing about this for a while, and so have some other people. Talk about the pushback you get from parents who don't feel they can do this, and also from the tech people themselves, and then talk about the good things that happen, as in people saying, at last someone's told us something. Because
Yeah.
I know you must be experiencing both.
Yeah. So, I don't get a ton of pushback from parents most of the time. And I give talks at, for parent groups in schools, quite frequently. What I hear the most is, "Oh, but that ship has sailed. You can't put the genie back in the bottle." That's the most common pushback, if you want to call it that. And I address that in the book because I think that's important to address of, hey, what if you did give your 11-year-old a smartphone? Well, take it back.
Yeah,
Take it
right.
back. Um, and give him a flip phone or give him a phone designed for kids or give him no phone at all. That's too
Yeah,
young. So I don't agree with that argument of like, oh, once you've given it to them, it's all over. You let them on social media, well, it's all over. No, there are
yeah,
still things that you can do.
yeah,
And, yes, it's easier if you do it, a certain way from the beginning, but you can go back. I had to do that with my kids and their laptops. We did really well with phones, but then with laptops we had to backtrack, and I'm really, really glad that we did.
Well, and you talk about laptops because I'm thinking of
Mhm.
one of my youngest grandchildren, and it's like, no, she doesn't have a phone, too young. But then all of a sudden, she's watching YouTube stuff on her laptop.
Yes.
It's like, well, this is just a big square phone. It's different, but it's not different.
Yeah.
And so I love that about you're saying it's not too late. This was a theme that ran all the way through your book. And
Mhm.
it's like good medical care. My wife had a heart attack a few years ago. Well, it's still not too late to get your cholesterol down and start eating more
Yeah.
vegetables. I mean, it's not too late. I love that. Overall, kids are surprisingly self-aware that the time they spend online is often not beneficial or healthy. And of course, that's something I've heard elsewhere, and also I've heard you say it.
Mhm.
But talk about that a little bit in terms of where you got that information from and
Mhm.
how that speaks to the parent who says, well, it's too late, they already have a phone, but
Right.
the kids know they're not doing well. And I think those two things belong together.
Yeah. So I also give talks to middle school students and high school students, and that's what I hear from them. I think actually kind of similar to their parents. They'll say, "We know, we just don't know what to do about it because all of our friends are on it. And if I don't text my friend back right away, she's going to think that I'm mad at her." So I say, have that conversation with your friend of say, sometimes I'm taking a break from my phone. I'm not always going to text you back right away.
Yeah,
And
and you
then,
sort of you say that
yeah,
here. You say the good news
mhm,
is most kids, even teens, respond to structure and limits. They
yes.
like knowing what to expect and what the rules are, even around screens. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but it
No,
was
it's all
kind
right.
of
Yeah.
on the next page here.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I found is like having concrete rules just helps so much with teenagers because so one of them, is give the first smartphone with the driver's license. So my middle one is 15 right now. She is turning 16 in about 10 days, and she doesn't have that driver's license yet. She's got her permit, so it's in process. And
Yeah,
she said, "Hey, can you give me that smartphone for my 16th birthday, even though I don't have the driver's license yet?" And I said no.
yeah.
And that's what we did with your older sister. That's what we're going to do with your younger sister as well. So that's the rule, and we're sticking to it. And we had that conversation, but that was the
Yeah.
last time we had that conversation because it's a very clear rule.
And the thing that was interesting about the driver's license thing later in the book, you talk about, well, kids aren't getting out enough. And you're saying, well, you sit at home
Yes.
terrorized because now the kid's driving and they could have an accident. But what's worse is having an interior life that's completely between four walls, or worse yet, in your bedroom alone at night with the smartphone. And you're saying, help them get their driver's license for one reason. It's a marker because you want them out, not as in you want an empty nest, get out of my house, you're grown up, go get a job, but you want them out experiencing the world. And I thought that was a big part of your book. The kind of hovering, you can't even go in the neighborhood, you might be snatched by three guys in a van and we'll never see you again. That paranoia has fed into this
It has.
idea of safety because now you're in your room with a phone. That's better than wandering the neighborhood. And you're saying, no, it's not.
That's right. It's not. Um, so for many, many, many reasons. Plus, I mean, it's not just that we've overprotected kids in the physical world. We've also massively underprotected them in the online world.
Yeah,
So we have that idea that, oh, they're in their bedroom, they're safe, but very often they're not. Unknown
yeah,
adults can contact them. They can be radicalized online. They're exposed to a lot of this toxic content. If
yeah.
they're in their bedroom alone, that's literally depressing. And that's what we see over and over for the teens who are just on that screen all the time. That is
Yeah.
not good for mental health.
Well, and one of the ways we see that it's not good is that, I tend to be more on the liberal side of politics, but my side of the aisle, as it were, talks a lot about guns. But of course, there's another thing that links all these mass shootings, including the recent assassination that we saw that's been so much in the news with Charlie Kirk, and that is that every single one of these young men spent their whole life online.
Yeah,
I mean, if you really wanted to talk about limiting the deadly weapons in America, the phone is as deadly as the gun. I know that's an odd idea, but it really is in terms of the results it's produced. And just like you show that, before the phone came along, there was less levels of depression, self-harm, and all these other things. When people say, well, back in my day, there were no mass shootings and there were a lot of guns. Well, what's the difference in that picture as well?
mm hmm Yeah. So yeah, the shooter recently is a very unfortunate, sad example, chronically online and apparently was radicalized.
Yeah, and we see that in all sorts of ways. And then not only that, but the predators trying to get your kid's name and address and meeting up with people.
Yeah.
There's all those extremes. But I think that
Yeah.
your book very wisely talks about those things. But what you really deal with is not the extreme, but you deal with the everyday loneliness, which everyone
Yes.
knows is a killer. Um, One thing I want to get to right away here that I think is so important is be a role model. Last but not least,
Hmm.
put your own phone away as much as you can. It usually is not a good idea to say one thing and do another. Well, once again, parents know that when it comes to things like please and thank you, or, don't leave the door open so the dog escapes.
Hmm.
You teach by doing. But then when you see a mother or a father constantly looking at their phone in the presence of their children, two things are happening. One, it's an insult to the rest of the family, whether a parent or a child's doing it. Um, but it also sets a totally different example. So when you talk to parents about this, what kind of reactions do you get? Is it mea culpa, or do people push back on this, or do they agree that that's what they're doing?
Hmm. So, I acknowledge that, adults are allowed a certain amount of quote digital hypocrisy. Sometimes you're on call for work or there's an issue with an elderly parent. There are reasons, but as much as you possibly can. Yes, if you do not want your kids on their devices at the dinner table, you should not be on your device at the dinner table yourself. You set a good example. Um, no phones in the bedroom overnight is another one that I think people of all ages should be doing. That's another great way to set a good example for your kids is get that phone out of the bedroom. You're going to sleep better too. So there's lots of benefits.
I'm talking to Gene Twenge about 10 rules for raising kids in a high-tech world. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this, there's nobody in America who I read more assiduously than Jean, and I follow her. You're a genuine public intellectual, and I am your public. So thank you. And this is an incredible addition and a really necessary one. I just, literally, I know it's cliched, but this is a book everybody needs to read. And if you have anyone in your life who is raising a child of any age, or you're thinking of having a family, or you're a ruined person who, as you look back, the phone really wrecked part of your life. This is the book, and it's going to be our book club offering in October. I just want to talk about something you say here that you mentioned, but I want to read this. All of this goes double for kids having any type of mobile phone. Delay for as long as possible. There's usually no compelling reason for elementary school kids to have any kind of phone. And of course, you see the beginning of this when you see a toddler go by in a stroller,
Mm.
facing forward so they can't even make eye contact with the mother or the father. And they're already glued to a device. So I want to bring up something that's a little politically incorrect here, but it seems to me that when you have a huge impetus toward career, which you talk about in your article with the kind of advice you were getting, saying, delay motherhood and you're not going to be as happy as a mother, and then you push back a little bit in the article I read earlier. Um, Part of, I think, the success, the kind of demonic success, to get excessive here, of the iPhone industry and these tech bros, what they're counting on besides their algorithms that keep narrowing the focus of information. So if you're into beheadings, that's what you're going to be watching, to use an extreme example.
Mhm.
But beyond that, it's that we are in a day and age in which being a parent is one of many consumer choices. And when you are trying to fit career into parenthood, male or female, that little screen in the stroller or on the airplane or whatever it is an easy fix for a while. And then it becomes a habit for both the parent and the child. So without judging individuals or people, I'd like you to talk a little bit about that as a parent. Forget the book for a minute. How do you do that? Because I've taken kids on long trips pre-phone, and Jeannie always would pack a bag of little toys and books that they'd never seen before. So they could
Yeah.
gradually unpack these through the trip. And she was very creative. And we would fly from Switzerland to the States and back again because we were living there at the time. And these days, it's just a phone, a tablet, you hand the kid that, they're strapped in, and you never see them again because they're just looking at this thing. How does that work in terms of
Mhm.
training their brain to function in a way that if, for instance, you took it away and Jeannie handed them a little bag of toys, I have a feeling that that would work for about 3 minutes with them because they'd be saying, now I have to do something. I have to use my imagination. This is work. They wouldn't be
Yeah.
saying that, but it would seem that way. Can you address that as someone who works on psychological issues of just child rearing, of the kind of attention that they're give to things once they get into the swipe and look and do kind of
Yeah.
thing?
So I think kids should never have their own tablet. Tablets are kind of this in-between thing where you can think of situations where, especially once they're at a certain age and, getting around by themselves, they might need a phone. And then by middle school, they often get a laptop, but there's really no compelling reason to have a tablet. So that kind of makes it easy. Um, And if there are certain situations where a tablet might be useful, they can borrow yours. So I have been quoted as saying that on airplanes, all bets are off. It is really hard, especially with toddlers, but it doesn't have to be the entire plane ride. It can be, and because I love that idea, and I fly a lot, so I have seen parents who have done that and brought the coloring books and the toys and so on, and their kids do fine. So if you could do that, awesome. And then maybe, a little bit on the iPad, but not the whole time. Um, and I think planes are the exception. They're very much the exception
Sure.
because other situations, like that stroller ride,
Yeah.
that is a great example of the entire point of a stroller ride. I mean, sure, it's to get out of the house, but for that child to see the world around them.
Yeah.
And they're not going to see the world around them if their stroller has a tablet attachment.
Yeah.
And I also feel the same way about restaurants. Even though restaurants are one of those tough situations with toddlers and preschoolers, how are they going to learn how to be in that situation at a restaurant without a screen unless they learn how to do that when they're young?
Yeah.
And that's the
Exactly.
other reason why planes are different. Most adults are watching screens on a plane, but
Yeah.
at least hopefully they're not doing that in a restaurant. They're having conversation with other people, they're enjoying their meal, they're enjoying the atmosphere, and that's what young kids have to learn how to do as well.
Yeah. And it's funny because a question that's not directly related to your book, but it sort of is that I want to ask you. And then we're going to get to your vacation advice of not having phones on vacations, which I think is great. Um, how do you think this is going to play out generationally? Again, let's take who's on this show here. So I'm 73, five grandchildren, um, three kids, raised two of those three kids in Switzerland pre everything, no computer, no phone, no nothing, and then one here, then the older kids who were raised in Europe, and then also here, and then these three who were here who were more into the phone thing. But they have a grandfather who remembers another time. So, for instance, during the COVID lockdown, I rebuilt my barn because I'm a good carpenter, and I taught my grandson carpentry. There
Mhm.
was no phone involved. He worked with me on some masonry projects this summer. I taught the kids cooking. Jeannie was upstairs. She's an incredible seamstress and also, cutting and designing. Okay, so their grandparents know how to do excuse the language, we know how to do shit because
Mhm.
we learned. We were out doing
Yeah.
in different parts of the world, but that's what we did. Okay, then their parents are sort of in between. My youngest grandchildren's parents are pretty much phone people for work, but also kind of, uh, looking at their phone a lot, but it isn't their totality.
Mhm.
Now comes a generation that doesn't even not, they don't only not know what that experience was. The only people in their lives are kind of like grandparents were when I was a kid talking about horses and buggies. It doesn't relate at all. So it's like knowing my grandfather who was around before, there were airplanes. Well, I
Mhm.
can't relate to that.
Yeah.
So, how do you see this playing out generationally? And I remember an article in the New York Times by some of these talking about tech executives who had their kids in a Waldorf school in
Yes.
Los Gatos because they didn't want
Yep.
their children having phones a few years ago.
Yep.
So, how does this play out when there's no one around who knows a different world than doing what Google tells you and what
Mhm.
AI tells you and and sex is just porn from 8 years on old. That's the only real sex education you've had. When I see this multiplying out, what do my grandchildren's children do? What world are they living in? How does this play out in your view?
This is actually something that gives me some hope because Gen Z young adults are speaking out about these issues. And there's even some who are advocating for more regulation of technology because of the experiences that they had. And when I first started giving talks to young people on this issue is around 2018, I was really afraid that they would do kind of what you were just saying of like,
Yeah,
that's horse and buggy, what are you talking about? You're an old. And that is not how they reacted.
Yeah,
They are well aware. They're well aware of the downsides. They just don't always know how to solve it. So I think that's what we have to focus on is there's a pretty good consensus now across all generations that this is a problem,
yeah.
but we have to come together to solve it.
Yeah. And I think this would be one issue. I mean, God, I don't want to jinx it by saying it. But this is one thing, I come out of an evangelical fundamentalist background. I get the religious right. I know who voted MAGA. I know who those 83% are. And I helped create that world because Dr. Koop and I, with my father, made a pro-life film that started the whole evangelical wing of the anti-abortion movement. And then I changed my views. But I understand that. This is one thing that the homeschool evangelical stay-at-home moms and my friend up the road who had a Trump sign in his yard, they would all agree on this. So I think
Yeah,
you you
it's
you would have a
bipartisan for sure.
you would have a nonpartisan cross-cultural thing. Does that translate into legislation? Are we ever going to get, the Republican right and the Democratic left sitting down and saying, okay, got a lot of disputes here, but we all agree
Mhm.
we're going to take Gene's book and turn it into
Mhm.
law. We're going to do something about this. Is there any sign that could happen?
There's hope, and it is bipartisan, and it's one of the few issues that has bipartisan support. Whether it'll happen in the U.S., I don't know. I'm more hopeful. Well, Australia already passed
Sure.
no social media until 16, and they're going to verify age, which is fantastic. That goes into effect in
Yeah.
December, I believe. And then in Europe, also, I think there's more of a possibility that will happen. There's already been, France was at the forefront of this in terms of
Yeah.
no phones during the school day, at least up to about grade 8 or so. And I think there's going to be more of that, and I really hope it'll happen in the U.S. as well. Just not as sure.
Well, my all three of these youngest grandchildren that I take care of, they're in a no phones in school
Great.
and have been all through high school. So it does happen. And I hope that it becomes legislated because where's the advantage of having phones in public schools? I don't get it. Who would want that? I mean, just from the teacher's point of view, it's a
I know.
disaster.
Yeah, and the vast majority of teachers agree with that. I think early on there was some hope they could be used for educational purposes, but that hope died pretty quickly.
Well, of course, it wasn't just a hope. I remember the propaganda from the industry. They were going to come in and remake schools. They were going to, you would only have a tablet in school. Um, all of these tech giants, individuals and companies, at some point were involved. Of hey, kids don't, their attention won't wander anymore. It would be like classrooms in which they're showing nothing but TV stuff back in our day or
Yeah.
my day.
Hmm.
They were going to be the big solution, weren't they? And it didn't quite work out. You've got
It
a,
did
a
not.
thing here which I think is great. If you want to get Gen X and older millennials to open up online, just mention how unsupervised we were
Uh-huh.
growing up. Parents had literally no idea where their kids were or what they were doing, like 90% of the time, wrote Shannon Foley Martinez. Another said,
Mm-hmm.
I roam farm wide from age 4 onward. Again, I think that we've traveled so far that you have to explain this to younger generations that it was perfectly normal to get on a bike and go somewhere, or you could walk over
Yes.
to town, or whatever. Just talk about that aspect and the kind of hunger that I feel talking to younger kids and my grandchildren's high school friends. When I talk about my exploits and they ask for these things as a story,
Yes.
the way I used to ask Korea war vets for their war stories,
Right.
and they just want to know when I used to roam around in the Swiss Alps and help tend cows or something. And to them, this is a glamorous life. You were out there, you were free, your mother didn't know where you were.
Yep.
Talk about that a little bit because I think that's really poignant.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the other piece of it. Real world freedom. And this can start very young. That kids are just not they're not walking to school. Teenagers are less likely to get their driver's license or to go out with their friends or to go out on dates or to have a paid job. Um, many kids have never gone into a store by themselves and bought something. They just don't have the freedom that they used to. So I have to give credit here to Lenore Skenazy, who is the head of the group Let Grow. She wrote a book called Free Range Kids after she
Yeah,
let her 9-year-old take the New York subway alone. And
yeah,
he loved it. He was begging for that freedom.
Yeah.
And she got labeled the worst mother in America
Yeah.
because there was so much pushback against this.
Yeah.
But she dug it after that experience, she dug into all the statistics and concluded
Yeah.
it's actually safer now than it was when Gen Xers were kids for
Yeah.
kids to be out and about.
Yeah.
And the resilience they get from that is amazing. Because, think about it. Your kid's going to go off to college or to the workplace. And then if they have not developed those skills of decision making independence, what's going to happen then? So
Yeah.
I work at a college campus. I go around to a lot of college campuses. That's what I hear everywhere I go. They say I have more and more students who can't make even simple decisions without texting their parents.
Yeah. Yeah. Or getting approval somehow from their friends.
Yeah,
And
that's the
it's
other
quite
aspect.
distressing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was sent to boarding school when I was 10 in the UK. And the first time my mother went with me to see the school. After that, from then on, I would fly from Geneva, Switzerland to London's Heathrow and catch the cab to Victoria Station and take the train to Haywards Heath Station and
Yeah.
take the bus to Linfield alone.
Yeah.
And everybody was. And so there'd be other kids who were meeting in various places, but no one was saying, you're neglected children because your parents expect you to be able to buy a ticket, make the correct change, and find a cab. I mean, this was,
Yeah.
even traveling alone was not a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And we need to come back to that. And my oldest did that. She loved that. Even my middle one, who's very introverted and cautious,
Yeah.
she flew alone and it was a great experience for her. Just being able to do that and the confidence that she gained from doing
Yeah.
that, it was fantastic.
Yeah, and I think the same happens even when you're doing little activities like I taught these youngest three to ski up here in New Hampshire. And,
Mhm.
from the time they're about 7, 8 old, I'd say, okay, I'm going to wait at the bottom or go have a cup of coffee. You guys ski for a while. They could ski by then and come find me when you're done. Take a few runs by yourself. And
Absolutely.
you would see parents who would follow their children as if they were a bomb about to go off and just stay hovering behind them. What's
Yeah.
okay, you can get hurt skiing. That's a different issue. But what's going to happen on that they're not going to be snatched by aliens from the ski slope. And
Yeah.
where do you think that mentality comes from? If I can just quiz you as a social scientist and a parent,
Yeah.
what happened to us? Why are we all so afraid to let our kids do anything? And why does everybody need permission from their parents or text them how to change a light bulb?
Right. Yeah. It's like a kind of mass delusion in some ways. And I think it started with media coverage.
Yeah,
If it bleeds, it leads. If a kid got snatched, it leads. And it made it look much more common. It started to shift the social norm.
yeah,
And then it went from there. And then even parents who wanted to give their kids freedom were afraid to do so, or
yeah,
even afraid to talk about it.
yeah.
And it just snowballed. And I think that tide also is starting to turn.
Hmm.
And, more states are passing reasonable childhood independence laws. So that's wonderful. I think there is progress.
Yeah, one of the things that I've quoted you a lot on in work I've done to other people, but also in some things I've written, and I've been writing a book that'll be out sometime fairly soon about long marriages and children and behavior and dogs, called The Gospel of Zip, that should be out. But I have long passages from you that I footnote and quote and put you in my bibliography and everything else on something that is very related to everything we're talking about. And I guess if you wouldn't mind talking about that a little bit, and that is the work you've done on the trouble that these generations, these iPhone generations, have sustaining relationships, forming them, sustaining them. And of course, you even go into the statistics of less sex and why I'm too young to have a relationship, even in college. I fell in love when I was a high school age and stayed in love with the same woman, which is a story you don't hear too much these days. But okay, so that was us. But I'm shocked that, the idea of high school, okay, you're too young to fall in love. You have this big important thing to do called get into college. Now you're in college, you have this big important thing called career.
Hmm.
What happened to that as well? And how does
Yeah.
that fit with what you were saying about not even being able to fly alone or go out alone and text your
Yeah.
mother about, are these the same things or is this just different things? And how do they relate to
Hmm.
what you're talking about here
Yeah.
in 10 rules for raising kids in a high-tech world? Because when people can't fall in love and you don't even have sex as a teenager, I'm not advocating or not advocating, but you know what I'm
Mhm.
talking about. All the
Yeah.
stuff that we just thought happens
Right.
isn't happening. And then, of course, you talk to the Paul Moreland or Brad Wilcox about the demographic you know, non-replacement of babies in Korea and in our own culture and so forth. You add this picture up, and you've got this sort of looming extinction in some ways. If you're from another planet looking at the human race right now and they're going extinct, they're not having relationships and falling in love and having babies, it would be a fair question to look if you're a representative of the human race. And my first question to you is, well, how's all this working out for you?
Yeah. Do you know
Well,
what
what's
scares?
happened?
Yeah.
What's happened?
And you know what scares me the most is something that is on the forefront just in the last 6 months or so.
Hmm.
AI boyfriends and girlfriends.
I
So
shake my head.
I know. So we've already got fewer young people dating and forming relationships. And now we've got this possible replacement that your 13-year-old's first quote romantic relationship might be with a bot because these companies are pushing these AI companion apps so heavily.
Hmm. When we say these companies, who are we talking about?
Well, and that's a little, it's a little different now. Some of the AI companies are different. And I'm not well versed in that. But
Yeah.
ChatGPT has that function. But then there's also a lot of other companies. I'd be hard pressed to say their names, but they have these companion apps. And I mean that's yet another reason to not give your kid a smartphone until later. Because fortunately, the basic phones, the phones designed for kids that my two younger children have, they not only don't allow social media, they also don't allow these AI companion
Yeah.
apps, which is great.
I just want to thank you so much for taking the time and tell you that I admire your work and I use it all the time. And you're a real source. Your kids are lucky to have you, even if they're not pleased all the time about phone limitations. But I'll bet they already are. I bet they look at the quality of their lives and they're already grateful for what you've done on that.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, me too. And I really love the book. October it'll be our book club. I wish you every
All right.
success with it.
Thank
Whatever
you.
we can do to help it happen, we will do. And National Treasure fits the bill here for Gene Twenge.
Thank you.